Okay, now this is going to be Wednesday's assignment. In case I don't have any time tomorrow, this is something I'll just let you guys listen to on Wednesday together. So let's start with the story of Christianity, and this is going to be pages 84 to 86. Mission and Reform. So in the crumbling society of the West, the Christian clergy played a leading role in maintaining a degree of stability. The better educated among them assumed key political and civic positions in society. At the end of the 6th century, a pope came to the papal throne who had a very clear idea of how to use this situation to further the cause of the Christian faith within the declining emperor. And his name was Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great, 590 to 604, was born to the noble Anicia family, and he was the nephew of Pope Felix. Prior to his becoming a monk, he had been the prefect of Rome, which we are learning about with Pontius Pilate, one of the highest civic offices. He had also been ordained a deacon and sent as a legate to the court at Constantinople, which is another word for Istanbul. On the death of Pope Pelagius II in 590, Gregory was summoned from his monastery and elected pope by the people and clergy of Rome. The city had been laid waste by the pestilence and plague during the 5th and 6th centuries, and contemporary accounts describe Gregory sailing through the city in a flood, bringing food and rescuing people stranded by the waters. Just as Roman army officials established camps and legions in conquered territories to keep the peace, so Gregory knew that he had to convert the barbarians who posed a constant threat to the church. Realizing he could not count on any support from the emperor in the east, he believed it would be wise to make allies of the barbarians. As a monk and former civil official of the Roman Empire, Gregory understood the importance of establishing monasteries and knew that the monks could provide the missionaries needed to preach to the barbarians. Gregory did not favor the idea of monks locking themselves away to achieve their own sanctity. Instead, as they were to be spiritual soldiers of the church, they could be ordered to go into the barbarian lands, find monasteries, found them, and convert and teach the pagan peoples. When Gregory became pope, he dispatched a monk, Augustine, to head a mission to the pagan Anglo-Saxons who had occupied the eastern half of England. There is a story that Gregory, while still abbot, was walking across the marketplace in Rome when he saw 2 tall, fair-haired boys. Asking who they were, the reply came, Anglius sunt. They were Anglo-Saxon and furthermore pagan. Gregory, punning on the word, replied, non-Angli, sed Angli sunt. They are not angels, but angels. Gregory advised Augustine to accept those pagan practices he felt to be compatible with Christianity. Quoting a text from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, test everything and hold on to what is good. So in other words, if they were doing some things that were pagan but were not majorly a problem, don't make them give up everything to come over and become a Christian. It was best, he believed, to avoid giving the pagans needless offense while offering the Christian message to them with respect. Augustine succeeded in converting King Ethelbert of Kent, who was married to a Christian queen, and he established his cathedral at Canterbury. More monks were sent to help Augustine, and steadily they moved north. As they did so, they found themselves in those territories where the Irish monks were already engaged in missionary work. The Celtic monks and the new missionaries from Italy were divided on a number of issues, such as fasting, penance, and discipline. The greatest source of conflict, however, was the fact that the Celtic and Roman churches celebrated Easter on different days. In 664, the two sides agreed to meet at a synod in town of Whitby in the north of England to thrash out their differences. After a tense debate, the British monks won the argument in favor of adapting to Roman customs. From this time onward, Easter was celebrated on the same day throughout Western Europe. The harmonious fusion of the two traditions helped. The harmonious fusion of the two transitions helped the monks to consolidate their work, and it also led to an interchange of ideas among those monks who left Ireland and Britain to work as missionaries in Central Europe. Their missionary activity was to restore stability and some form of culture to Europe, long disoriented by the wars that had ravaged it. Over the next decades, both Celtic and British monks continued southward into mainland Europe, establishing monasteries and Christian centers. The monks made an unparalleled contribution to the lives of the peasants, helping them restore and cultivate land that had been destroyed by the barbarians. The most famous of these monks was Willibrord, the apostle of the Frisians, and Boniface, the English Benedictine monk, revered as the apostle of the Germans. And so some of the side little bars on here, it talks about church bells. Small hand bells were used by Celtic bishops to summon people to church services. Larger bells were rung in monasteries to divide the day and call monks and nuns to prayer. From the 6th century onward, the use of bells spread throughout Europe, and many were installed in bell towers beside the church. In addition to calling people to prayer, they also alerted people to impending invasions, floods, fire, and other disasters. Bells could also be heard during thunderstorms, as the ringing of them was believed to avert lightning. Here's a picture on the bottom of 84, of remains of a 6th century Celtic Christianity on Iona. This was a monastery with 12 monks on the island of Iona off the west coast of Scotland. Throughout the 6th and 7th centuries, the monastery served as a base for missionary activity in Scotland and northern England. The Celtic Church thus played an important role in reviving Christianity in northern Britain. And then here's advice given to St. Augustine by Pope Gregory the Great. Destroy as few pagan temples as possible. Only destroy their idols. Sprinkle them with holy water. Build altars and put relics in the buildings. I think we'll stop there with those 2 pages about the story of Christianity, 84 to the top. Oh, I'm sorry, the top of 86. I was supposed to just read a little bit more here. Willeberd rekindled Christianity in the Netherlands, and in 608-98 was consecrated bishop of the Frisians by Pope Sergius I, the king of the Franks. Pepin gave Wildeberd permission to build a cathedral in the Dutch town of Utrecht. So I didn't read the little bit at the top of that. And then the story of Christianity, pages 84 to 86. I think the major thing I wanted to say was what was the advice? Gregory gave Augustine some advice about how to deal with pagan practices in the land where they were heading. And what was that advice? The advice was that accept whatever pagan practices were at least compatible with the Christian faith. And then, do you think this is good advice? Do you think, supposing this is good advice, can you think of practices in the non-Christian culture that surrounds you that might reasonably be accepted by the church as compatible with Christian faith? So a possible example, in Muslim cultures, you provide wash basins and spigots outside the church building, similar to those used outside mosques. In the United States, sing church music accompanied by pop or rock or a country sound are sort of ways that they're saying you kind of, Okay, so let me now jump to page 54 to 55 and 56 to 57 in the 100 most important events. So 54 and 55 is Gregory the First becomes the Pope. And this says, we're right here. It says, though no longer capital of an empire, Rome still had prestige. After all, the ancient city had connections with the apostles Peter and Paul. For many years, the bishops of Rome had attempted to increase their power. Slowly, theirs had achieved a favored position over the other sees, S-E-E-S, and the bishop of Rome had become the pope. Yet the man who would do the most to bolster the authority and power of the papacy did not do so for political gain. A humble monk who did not seek high office, he rose to the papacy over his own objections. Gregory was born in 540 to a noble Roman family with a history of political service. He became prefect of Rome, the highest civil office, yet he did not feel cut out for the public life, and he resigned, divvying up his estates for the founding of monasteries and joining one himself. A few years later, he would become an abbot. His piety, which is sort of like his devotion to God, and no doubt his background as a skillful administrator, attracted attention. In 590, when the Pope died, the Romans unanimously asked Gregory to become his successor. Though Gregory refused, the public will prevailed. As a former statesman, the new pope brought his powers of ruling to his office. When the Lombards threatened Rome, Gregory appealed to the emperor at Constantinople for help. When none came, the bishop of Rome mustered troops, negotiated treaties, and did all required to bring peace. Gregory's independent actions proved to the emperor's exarch, his representative, that Gregory was quite able to keep order in Rome. These political moves would become some of the first steps in dividing the Christians of the Eastern and the Western empires. But Gregory did not really have political ambitions. His interests were spiritual. Greatly concerned about pastoral care, he insisted that the clergy see themselves as shepherds and servants of the flock. He referred to himself as the servant of the servants of God, and his pastoral rule, an amazingly insightful study of people's spiritual trials and how the clergy should deal with them, became a kind of ministerial textbook for the Middle Ages. Gregory's Dialogues was an early attempt at hagiography, which was writing about the saints, which emphasized the fantastic and miraculous, turning the saints into sort of superheroes. During his papacy, veneration of the body parts, clothing, and so on of saints was encouraged. It would become a major feature of medieval piety. For centuries, no church could be established without the relic of a saint being placed in it. Though Gregory did not claim to be a theologian, some of his beliefs became essential in Catholic theology. He believed in purgatory and taught that masses celebrated in behalf of the dead could relieve their pains there. In addition, he helped popularize the teaching of Dionysius the Areopagite, who had written about different categories of angels. Though he may not have originated the Gregorian chant, Gregory was interested in church music. In addition, he authorized an evangelization mission to Kent. Within 14 years, Gregory achieved so much that later generations named him Gregory the Great. Perhaps he became great because he was a humble man. And those are pages 54 and 55. So this reminds you here, it says, no church could be established without the relic of a saint. That's a piece of a body or a personal item of a saint. He believed in purgatory, and he taught that masses celebrated in behalf of the dead. So according to Catholic belief, that's a place or a state believed to exist after death. According to the authors, was Gregory the Great motivated by political or spiritual interests as Pope? Can you guys get ready to go to the Katinskis? Yeah, I'm going with you. We're going to go together for 2 hours. So go get ready to go. He was interested in spiritual. His concern for the church was that it received pastoral care. Okay, that's probably good for that. And then let's read the next 2 pages there, which were 56 and 57, the Cyanide of Whitby. 2 Christianities existed in England. One was Celtic, strongly monastic, contemplative, and mission-minded. The other was Roman, well-organized and firmly tied to the rest of Christendom. Columba's mission to Iona had resulted in an outgoing community of Celtic-style Christians who aggressively evangelized the Angles and the Saxons. Shortly before Columba died, Pope Gregory sent Augustine and over 30 other monks to England to evangelize and to bring the Celtic church into conformity with the Roman church. Augustine's moderate success centered on Kent and Essex. In 627, Paulinus of York established the Roman Church in Northumbria, but his efforts soon fell apart when a heathen king came to power. When the church was reestablished there, it was Celtic. Yet in the early 600s, there was a great deal of cross-pollination going on. The 2 traditions were not vastly different. The major distinction between them was the date on which they celebrated Easter, which we talked about earlier. Let's see. So it says, the matter was brought to a head by Ausy, the new king of Northumbria, in 664. He followed the Celtic tradition, but his wife was of Roman tradition. So he would be celebrating Easter when the queen was fasting for Lent, and that simply would not do. He summoned an assembly at Whitby where they all discussed what should happen, and they argued about Easter. Some historians argue that the decision proved to be wise. The English church got the best of both worlds. The Celtic spirit was still very much alive, but it needed the Roman organization to focus it. And the immediate wake of Whitby, things turned sour. A plague hit England about the time that the Archbishop of Canterbury died. For 5 years, the church struggled without leadership. Then Theodore of Tarsus arrived to take position. Wisely, he bolstered the church leadership, appointing bishops and priests from both Celtic and Roman traditions. The next century was a golden age of art and scholarship in Britain as the Roman and Celtic styles complemented each other. I don't know if you say Celtic or Celtic. I'm really not sure. Much of this was destroyed by the Viking invasions, but numerous stone crosses remain, carved in both Celtic, and Roman styles, symbolizing the interdependence of these two traditions. Okay, so that was 56 and 57. Which I don't even see questions of for that in there, so we won't worry about that. And then the last thing is Jerusalem to Irian Jaya for our Wednesday reading, and that is 44 to 47, Roman Catholic. So I'm going to open up Jerusalem to Irian Jaya, 44 to 47. Roman Catholic missions baptizing the masses. So it is natural to think, especially from a Western linear perspective, that with the passage of time comes progress, that the Mediterranean world in AD 600, for example, would be far more advanced than it had been hundreds of years earlier. But that was not true. Western Europe was uncivilized in comparison with the Greco-Roman world at the time of Christ. The new world which emerged, the world of the first half of the Middle Ages, writes Philip Hughes, was to be a world where countrysides were vastly more important than towns, which indeed shrank to vanishing point. It was a world of illiterate peasants and country-bred fighting warrior lords, far removed from the centuries-old urban civilization of the Hellenistic East, where the church was born and for 400 years had its first development. So it feels like we've almost gone back in time. With the fall of Rome, the world changed. Where once there was a peace and where lay missionaries had traveled along the extensive network of Roman roads and the very scriptures were carried through an almost modern mail system, now there was violence and crime, a deteriorating infrastructure and danger at every turn. It was a world of barbarians that stretched far beyond the old borders of the Roman Empire. Life in this vast western backwoods on the vast frontier was hard and cruel. Missionary endeavors in this new world of the Dark Ages looked very different from those in earlier generations. Indeed, from this time forward, the role of the missionary would primarily be that of a pioneer or explorer, one who ventured into the interior or the backward of the regions of the land. The foreign missionary venturing into faraway deserts and mountains and jungles. These physical and geographical changes paralleled spiritual changes. It says that there was a mass conversion of Clovis's army, and it was the first of many during the Middle Ages. It was this method, writes Bruce Shelley, that converted Europe. The concept of individual conversion was the method used by the Protestant missionaries under the evangelical movements of the 19th century, which was an individual change of heart. But mass conversion is what expanded the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, discussing that basically a whole town would say they had converted. During this time, however, there were individuals who were truly concerned about Christian missions. I'm on the bottom of 45. Among them was Gregory the Great, one of the most able and influential popes during the whole medieval period. The story is told of how he was touched when he saw blonde British boys in the slave market and said, "They are angels, let them become angels." From that point on, Gregory made missions to faraway Britain a top priority. So Augustine and his team of monks evangelized England and baptized thousands of converts, but they faced many problems relating to pagan traditions, which we were talking about. Could pagan ceremonies, for example, be transformed into Christian observances? Although Roman Catholics dominated Christian missions during the Middle Ages, they were not the only missionaries of the period. The Celtic Church, represented by St. Patrick, Columba, and others, burned with evangelical zeal. An era of Christian missions, let's see. From Central Asia, the Nestorians moved farther east, and by the 9th century had reached China, and from there Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Their influence continued to grow, and by the 13th century it is estimated that there were no less than 27 metropolitan patriarchs and 200 bishops under them in China and surrounding areas. But in the centuries that followed, the church rapidly declined. The peace-conscious Nestorians were no match for the militant Muslims, and even worse were the armies of Genghis Khan and other barbarians who devastated large portions of Asia, including major centers of Nestorian Christianity. So an area of Christian missionaries was over and mostly forgotten. Because of the early doctrinal differences between the Nestorians and the Western Church over the two natures of Christ, Nestorians were viewed as heretics, and their great evangelistic endeavors were discounted. Scholars have more recently recognized that the changes of heresy were overstated and that the Nestorians were a vital part of the Christian missionary heritage. So just because they had this slight difference in the divinity of Christ, they were still powerful in their missions to the areas. As the Nestorians were pushing eastward, the Roman Catholic Church was pushing north and eventually across the seas. Unencumbered by families, missionaries spread out with courage and zeal to take the one true church to the ends of the earth. And so it says here, I'm not going to go through the questions for Jerusalem, Deir, and Jaya on that. Okay, and so that's Wednesday's reading that I will send you on Wednesday.